And we are live. It's Ed Bailey from Cribl with Randy Lariar from Optiv. We are here to talk about maximizing value and minimizing costs for effective tool deployment. Just imagine, as an engineer and architect, you've killed yourself to buy a new tool for your stack. You've gone through the arduous process, the hell of getting something approved. But now comes the hard part. What do you do next? So we're going to talk about ideas, strategies for getting the right mix of tools, the right mix of options, and so that you can get the best value from your tools. How are you doing today, Randy?
I'm great, Ed. How are you? It's good to be back.
Yeah, absolutely. This is great. I've been really enjoy the back and forth, and I really hope we can help our listeners you know, just figure out what to do. What to do, just it's such a hard problem.
Yeah,
It's,
absolutely. It's a. I think if you've been around technology long enough, you've experienced the pain of working really hard on something with the belief that on launch day or on delivery day, all your problems are going to go away, and you just realize you've got more problems and there's always opportunities to improve things. So it's been a central focus of my career. Of how do I have fewer days like that and help other teams achieve success.
yeah, I mean, it is such a big thing. I've over my period of my career, it's just you kill yourself trying to get budget approved. You find the tool, you're like in, and over time, you just figure out, shoot, I just so how do you do this right? How do you learn from, like, I'm gonna share my mistakes as a way to help people learn about, don't do this, and then just to get started right, because as when you put your neck on the line in an enterprise to say, I need X amount of money to get something done, you got to deliver, and that really is the hard part. And so just talk about strategies, how to get this done. And so we're going to get started with, and so we're going to pull out the dreaded slides. Got to have slides.
That's lesson number one, right? If it's not
Yeah.
on slides, is it even really in business strategy?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, the first time, it's always about maximizing value, minimize costs. And so, and also, as a tool owner, as an architect, you're going to get this stuff wrong. Always be ready to reevaluate, keep going, keep working on it, iterate, keep getting better. No one gets this stuff perfect the first time, but I think there's some basic things you can work on to help make this work. And so, and I can't tell you this, I've said this on my other live streams about budgeting. Start with your business objectives. Your business leaders, your budget holders simply don't care about the technology. They care about what's in it for them. How is what you're doing going to impact the business? So start with your business objectives. Hopefully you can work with your manager to define those business objectives. And what that does is that gives you a place to map your strategy, your deployment strategy, your tool strategy, your training strategy. So make sure that you're in clear alignment. Randy, can you share some of the examples that you've run into?
Yeah, sure. I think so. One of the things that surprised me in engineering, I think a lot of teams run into is this is not a technical problem. This is a business and a communication and a people problem. I mean, certainly, if you don't have the technical part solved, you don't even get to have this problem, right? But like,
Right.
assuming you do solve it, business objectives is an ambiguous term, and especially as an architect or a developer, that may not be immediately clear. So breaking it down into who are your stakeholders. You spend all day focusing on a particular piece of code or part of the data architecture. What do they spend their day focusing on? What are they getting paid for?
Right.
What'll get them promoted? What'll get them fired? What'll get them a nice fat bonus? Understanding just how the organization works and how you fit into your solution fits into that is important. And I got to say, it's probably the most important to do it before you even start your project, and to continue and continually evaluate and update those assumptions as you go. So, speaking of pain, I guess some of the biggest problems could be is, we've led a team having a really amazing set of capabilities, but met some new business owners who weren't aligned,
Right.
didn't know what the tool could do or how it could help derive value. And so that can be a little bit bumpy, especially when you got people who've dedicated months or even years to building a tool, and then to turn around and say, well, what is this and why is it important? And there's not really a wrong in that scenario. Like, everybody's got an understandable chain of events that gets you to that period, but at least there's a couple of uncomfortable discussions about,
Yeah.
well, what's the business strategy? Why are we here? Why did we do this? and how do we continue? And so those type of conversations happen all the time. And the best way to get through them is just to be as transparent as you can about where you're coming from and your objectives, as well as the other folks at the table.
Especially in, I think, today's macroeconomic environment, you're going to have very senior leaders at the top looking at all of the expenses. And they're going to ask questions about, why are we doing this? Why does this matter to the business? And if they don't get good answers, they're not going to spend money on it. And that's why it's just critically important to be able to have this information readily available. I used to think of this as my elevator pitch. I had a stock set of slides and an elevator pitch that I could share anywhere, because it comes up. You're in a meeting and someone is like, hey, why are we spending money on this? It really helps to have an answer. And you want to have that 2 or 3 sentence answer that hits on. So, for example, I need to cut my run rate and my observability cost. I need to get better data to get better results. I need to minimize my staff time so I can have my staff work on my admin time so I can have my staff work on more important business projects. Those are 3 sentences that relate to 3 direct business objectives, answers, and more often than not, you give that kind of answer to a leader, they're going to like, all right, this guy has his shit together. We can go on to the next expense. But it's important to be able to communicate that as a leader, because otherwise, especially in these sort of days, money's tight, money's precious. So you got to make sure you're protecting your budget.
Yeah, and the trick here too is it's not the what, it's the why.
Right.
So a lot of times, business leaders, even I catch myself doing this sometimes. You're not building a data pipeline, right? I mean, you are, but the communication is you are creating an observability platform that enables you to take cost out of your system, or you're building a cybersecurity that is addressing these specific risks that you'll have visibility and respondability to once it's in place. Without that why, it's just a bunch of software running in the cloud.
Exactly. And that's what I was saying, that like the pipeline, nobody cares. What they care about, we're not going to get fined for a GDPR violation. We're not going to get fined, but we're not going to get fined because we can't manage our retention correctly. Those are the things that matter to the business leader. So it's just critically important. You start there, figure out what you want to do. So Randy, can you let's get a couple of business objectives from a recent project that you worked on, just to give our listeners an example.
Well, at Optiv, we focus a lot on risk and cybersecurity. So
Right.
a lot of our clients are concerned with visibility, often against a framework like a MITRE or NIST, and making sure that they're able to detect and respond to in a timely manner, bad guys in their network. So a lot of times that can be the context, right? That we want to have X amount of visibility. The other context I deal with a lot is how to provide metrics to senior leadership. In the cyber world in particular, but also in IT, there's a sprawl of tools, lots of different things do different stuff. And it's very tempting to just put all the numbers you can get from all these different systems up on a dashboard and hand it up to management. But that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
Instead, you have to focus on the key things that are important to your business, like how many vulnerabilities do we have, or
that's a
what's our
recipe
time
for
to
some
respond.
hard questions that you can't answer.
Right. So a lot of our projects do revolve around that kind of space of what should I report and what's important in the context of my business, my industry, the part of the business I'm in, and then obviously how do we do that? That value drives through it.
Totally. And those are the kind of things that it is help. So it's important, if you're a tool owner, make sure you have this deck, make sure you've defined your business objectives, work with your leadership to make sure it matches their expectations. More often than not, senior leaders, even if you don't have the business objectives exactly right, as long as you can defend it with your management and you've mapped those objectives back to your strategy, back to your tool strategy, back to why we're doing this, then you're more than likely you're going to be safe. And as you mentioned, Randy, tool sprawl is it's incredibly messy how most enterprises are. If you have this, these questions are going to go down to the next person's tools, and they're probably not going to be able to answer their questions, and then the heat's off you. So this is how you protect yourself.
Let me share a trade secret. Don't tell anybody I told you this, but
Yeah.
if your company is publicly traded, at least once every 3 months, they're putting out a very detailed report about what the top of the house is focused on and priorities in the terms of their financial filings. Even if they're privately held, if they're decently big, there's news that comes out, if not daily, then weekly, that your company's mentioned in. So
Right.
setting up a quick, Google search alert, or, reading those reports will really let you know what your boss's boss is focused on. And if you don't know what your business objective is, you should be able to find some kind of lineage to that. Otherwise, you're going to be in some hot water.
Great idea. I really appreciate that. So let's move on a little bit. So we talk about tool strategy. When I talk about tool strategy, it's comprehensive in terms of how do I maximize this tool's value to the business. So let's talk about, say, like Cribl stream and observability data. In order to maximize that value, I need to get it deployed. I need to get it deployed widely, and then in order to get maximum value, so that I have total scope of all my observability data going through Cribl stream. But of course, getting that done is another thing. You're not going to be able to get this done in one day. But that is my strategy. How do I get total control of my data? How do I manage it? How do I clean it up? How do I use my pivot points in order to get more, to be able to use my destinations and be able to get that full flexibility. So full deployment is part of my strategy. Is you don't want to make it a niche. For example, I see it all the time where someone buys a tool and it only does one thing. And then you have questions are, how much are you helping the broader enterprise? And again, you have to answer that question of, you're only helping us a little bit, so maybe your budget gets cut. So do you have any examples of like tool strategy that you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I think I see a lot of tools that are underutilized, and I've seen some stats that are a couple of years old now, but most security organizations find that they use less than 50% of the tools that they have on. And I've absolutely butchered that stat, but I know it's out there somewhere. So I'm going to go with my gut on this one. But the point being that if you've served in an organization with a lot of tools, you probably have seen some of them which you do some things on, but you don't necessarily know all the functionality or care. Because again, even in your day to day, the why is important. But as
Yeah,
someone who's invested in building the tool or maintaining the tool, making sure that it gets full usage, the enablement and communication of those capabilities is critical. And I think that's an area where a lot of firms miss out to not fully engage those tools. To satisfy the primary business objective and any other objectives that might have come up during the design phase.
exactly. And as a tool owner, I think it is your duty to look for new use cases and new ways to maximize value of your tool. And it's important. Data is across the enterprise. It's not just in IT. And everyone in the enterprise wants to use data in one way or another. And so, I mean, for example, I've able to help data to help marketing, to help sales, to help the data center people, to help, I mean, everyone. We even had dashboards for the people who were the engineers for the HVAC and the engineering, because they wanted to see data from the building control systems. And so it's everywhere. And so as a tool owner, you want to keep reaching for new use cases. New use cases is new budget. So
Mhm.
you got to keep reaching, maximize your value.
Something I've seen done well, and it depends on the size of your firm, but at the larger firms, especially in a tool that has a lot of applicability, setting up something like a community of practice, which is informal, crosses reporting lines, but a kind of a centralized SharePoint, a Confluence page where here are resources to get training. Here's an internal certification program, a weekly webinar, lunch and learn, depending on the tool and kind of the scope of how many people it touches. A lot of larger firms use that to really enable some self-service on these tools. And depending on the tool, you can usually get some analytics back in terms of how many people are using it and how it's being used. Might impact your license count and whatnot. And so if you have a tool or you're a tool owner where there's that kind of broader applicability, I mean, even if it's only a half dozen people, thinking about a strategy for how do you build that community across reporting lines is a nice way to build some value.
You're absolutely right. I've also heard companies call it like a center of excellence.
Hmm.
Community practices are all real common ways. Hopefully you have SharePoint or your corporate wiki, build that out and share it widely. And this is another thing as an engineering manager, engineering owner, sometimes it's hard, but you got to brag on yourself. You got to keep talking about yourself. You got to keep sharing. And that's how you keep growing and maximize that value. And I think those things are, and that's a great idea. Training, super important. You make sure that you get value out of your tools from training. And so then this is where, for example, you get the tool deployed. In the next year, you say, okay, I'm going to start budgeting for training. I'm going to start requiring training. Here's YouTube videos. One thing I ended up doing was ended up assigning someone that entire job. I called it user engagement. All they did, training, office hours, how to get people better at tools. And so it better at the tools. Better they are at the tools, the more value you get.
Yep. And I guess, I have to put on my data consultant hat too, is get some metrics around it.
Yes.
What, again, you can go objective key result, right? From that business objective down to metric key results, or a lot of other frameworks. But is it number of active users? Is it, whatever your tool does, the amount of times that happens in a day, week, month? Is it number of trainings? Whatever is meaningful for your business, but track it, especially as a leader. It's good to kind of see that activity is continuing or increasing depending on what you're trying to do. And, you can't manage what you don't measure.
It is well said. As an engineering manager, it is really hard to take yourself out of the day to day. But as a leader, what we're talking about in terms of your elevator pitch, your business strategy, your metrics, that is your day to day. And and this is something I wasn't very good because I just couldn't stop myself from engineering stuff. But you got to spend less time doing that and more time on everything else in order to be a tool owner. And so it's just, those are things, because otherwise I've seen it too many times. I've experienced it myself. If you're not paying attention to all these other details, no matter how good your engineering is, then you start getting a lot of questions about, from leaders about, why are we spending money on this tool?
Absolutely.
So let's talk about your deployment strategy. So for me, when I started working in deployment strategy, learned this the hard way. I will gleefully say that I have messed these things up more than once. And so this is a hard won experience in terms of starting small. Can't emphasize this enough. Start small and use that to build a repeatable pattern. By starting too big or getting too aggressive and moving too fast, moving forward too fast, start running into trouble, and you're not repeatable. You can't be repeatable. You're not going to grow. You're not going to scale. Does that make sense, Randy? What's your experience with building a deployment strategy?
Oh, totally. You want to bank the quick wins, especially if it's in an area that is not yet proven, or you've put your neck out to say this is going to be ROI. Again, back to those metrics. What are the leading indicators that if a pilot works well, or if this particular use case can be delivered successfully, it's going to give momentum to the overall effort. So deployment, very, very rarely should it be big bang, everybody all at once gets access to the tool. It should be thoughtful and aligned to that how do we demonstrate value from the first release. And the other thing kind of hand in hand with that is communication. Again, not technical, but this is the stuff that trips things up. I can't tell you how many times I've seen teams that do a release, but they didn't tell the people who would be impacted. So all of a sudden, a tool that you thought was going to work doesn't work, or the communication, something's gone wrong. Stuff goes wrong. That's part of life. But not being transparent about that, or not having a good plan for what the rollback is, or just doing some testing and making sure you've gotten some user acceptance testing of the new version of your tool before you roll it out, so you have some hypercare focus for the first few days and weeks as needed. All of this stuff is about having a communications plan, going back to knowing who your stakeholders are, how to reach them, and making sure that their leadership is kind of cued in to all the things that are going to impact their world that they do care about, where it intersects with your tool.
And don't forget to brag on yourself. That's why I think those small, quick wins are so important. When
Yes.
you're in a lot of companies, there's going to be monthly, quarterly meetings where you want to have in your pitch deck of we solve this problem, we're cutting this cost, we're making this easier. And because if no one knows about your successes, then then your successes, if a tree falls in the wood, did it happen? And so you've got to communicate not only what you're doing, but make sure you record your wins. It's incredibly critical.
Yeah, and take time to celebrate too. It's kind of overlooked, but especially if in remote teams or in situations you've been working hard on something, you reach a milestone. There's a lot of work to do, but take the time to recognize the star performers and the partners across the business who made it possible. We're all at work for 40 plus hours a week with the same people, and it doesn't all have to be, did you do this? Did you do that yet? Some of it can just be thank you, and look how far we've come.
Yeah, as a leader and a manager, you can't say thank you enough. And also, when you're talking and bragging about your wins, never ever say I. You said, my engineer this, or my architect this, or we did this. Don't.
Well, I disagree with you in one sense,
Oh, yeah.
which is that when stuff goes wrong, then it's my fault. But if it goes well, it's the team's fault. team's credit.
Yeah, I mean, the way I like to say it is, we succeeded and I failed.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, but it's just it's super important. Seeing it from a leadership perspective, it's remarkable. People will run through walls for you if you're supporting them, and so it's important. So let's get on to minimizing cost. You want to minimize rework, and this is where a good reference architecture is important. But this is also why we're talking about strategy first, because you want to. So I was laughing. We're working on a new release of the Cribl reference architecture, and one of the architects was saying, I was asking all these questions, and his answer was, "It depends." And I was like, you know what? It's not helpful. And this is the reason why when you start, and this is why when you start, you have to define your end result and work backwards. And that's why your business objectives are so important, your deployment strategies, because then that gives you the guidelines of the reference architecture to get to your determined goal. That gives you something to design against. Real good example. You want, and different companies call these things business resiliency requirements. For example, I need to be able to log 5x or our average data in order to make sure that we're resilient against spikes, or we're going to scale and just be resilient. So that gives you the ability to then go to the reference architecture and says, okay, so our average is 1 terabyte, but I need to be able to scale to 5 terabytes. And so one core for every 200 gigs a day. And so that gives you the plain numbers of what to engineer toward. If you don't have that end result, then you're just guessing, you're feeling around in the dark. So this is just my best advice, to remove the whole "it depends" by defining what you want before you build on everything else. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think somewhere along the line, the agile framework made people think that, oh, we're going to go so fast that we don't need to do documentation, or we don't need to capture all these edge cases. And I think that's a endemic problem with a lot of places. It's architecture, it's requirements, it's support. There's if you bundle all those things into just broadly speaking documentation, it's another form of communication, in
Mhm.
terms of you're creating communication for yourself in the future. When a problem happens, you say, well, why do we design it that way? Having that information, especially if the team turns over, or if you've all gone on to different things, having a good architecture to refer back to, having the requirements and the user stories kind of spelled out in a way that's future proof is helpful. And it's one of those things that I see it quite a lot. Both from the technical, this is how the thing is built and why we built it this way, as well from the standard operating procedures. This is how we restart this part of the architecture. Here's how we do a health check after an upgrade. So there's a whole number of things that good teams have this down, but some of it's just blocking and tackling. But when it's not there, it creates a much longer rework cycle. It creates much more costly problem solvings, and exposes you to risk of making the same mistake multiple times.
Right. And that's why I think that starting small, because you can start small. Well, the way I look at it is, you start small, you can make small mistakes with a small impact. But if you start too fast and get too ahead of yourself and you're not repeatable, the impact of your mistakes gets magnified. And so that just it you want that repeatable pattern, because that's how you grow and grow safely.
Absolutely.
Yep. So I put together some ideas just so we can talk toward business value. Just want to give some just examples. So I'm using my favorite observability pipeline. It's the idea of value. So let's talk about retention. So for example, my business objective, I need to maintain 7 years of retention for one type of data. I need to maintain 5 years of retention for another type of data. I need to maintain infinite retention for yet another type of data. And that's your business objective. And also, how do I do this at the lowest possible cost? And so that's a way that you can use for an observability pipeline to say, here's how I'm going to filter, here's how I'm going to redirect, and here's how I'm going to park this data where I need it. And so I think those are and that's where you start small. Like, for example, you start in your small HIPAA area instead of starting in your large PCI area, in order to build that pattern and get used to it. So, do you have any examples of, like, starting small that you can share, that you work with, as part of your team with your customers?
Sure. I mean, even with Cribl, we've helped clients with proof of concepts, and wholesale, production implementations. And you definitely want to do the first before the second. Generally too, a lot of folks in cyber are thinking about the kind of disaggregating the SIM, right? So it's the third box over there on the right. Traditionally, everything has gotten dumped into your SIM, and then you'll build detections and do stuff with it later. As different tools have come out with different capabilities, as teams want to do more, machine learning, as you want to do that 7-year infinite retention, the design pattern that I'm seeing more and more is you want to dump that data somewhere cheap and pull only what you need into the SIM, or pull only what you need into your AI tool. And so that pattern again is something where Cribl is a powerful component in that, because you get to make those changes a whole lot easier than you used to be able to. And but the bottom line, the motivating factor is the same. Is each of these things has a certain price tag, and it will deliver a certain value. And even the risk value is can be priced, and ultimately you want to show in dollars and cents, which is the language of business. What is the return on investment?
Right.
And so that is where having a pipeline and able to tweak that cost number up and down while you work on the value side is so key.
And that's a pattern that recently, even a few years ago, everyone said, okay, you do our analytics, we do our threat hunt, we do all those things in the SIM itself, and it's simply too expensive. Storage costs too much, the licensing costs too much. With a good observability pipeline like Cribl Stream, the ability to park all your data into your own data lake on your own storage that you can query with cheaper, less expensive tools gives you not only cost controls, but also, I think, better capabilities, because you can get better value out of your data. Something just I ran into over and over again: when you're trying to do heavy analytics and detections at the same time, your IR team, your blue team, your threat hunters are running massive queries and knocking your detection values offline, because
Yep.
they're wrecking the system. And by moving that function over to the data lake, you create a nice separation. You decouple dependencies, and you get better results. I mean, think about how many times in tech when you can get better results, better architecture, and save money at the same time.
And this is a great example of technology doing technology, but not necessarily business value. How many use cases in the broader kind of data ecosystem have to be real time? We got a few in cyber, so that they're legit. But there's a lot of stuff that you do that doesn't have to be microsecond, right?
No, not at all.
It could be a couple seconds, it could be a minute, it could be semi alert, within the hour. It's important to look at your use cases and that compute that you're applying against them, and make sure that the compute that has to be real time is real time, and that you're not jeopardizing that from a cost perspective or a performance perspective by doing all this kind of over engineered detection on stuff that doesn't need to be that performant.
Exactly, and that's where I think you can use those analytics to make your detection pipelines even better. Think about how you can take with large amounts of data, you can do real testing on your detection pipelines in your data lake without actually stressing your detection pipelines. Just
Yeah.
that's one of my favorite things, of being able to just decouple dependencies.
Yep. And everybody, loves to all the buzz is about AI and machine learning. If you follow me on social, I'm guilty as well. I'm very excited about the space. But the key piece of that too is, in order to build models to create some of the amazing automation and insight
Correct.
the AI and ML lets you do, you need to have your data in cheap storage so it can process a lot of data.
Yep.
And then once you build those models, you can move them somewhere that it really isn't you can have terabytes or petabytes of data, train a model that's a megabyte. It's not you can get that insight and put it somewhere performant. But again, the point is the right tool for the right job, aligned to the business value that is the mission your company's on.
And you know what? There you go. Bingo. There's your elevator pitch. Why it matters. And so, yeah, exactly, exactly. So we got to close up on a little bit, but let's just want to show some examples of repeatable architecture. So one of the things when you start talking about your tool deployment strategy, one of the things I advocate a lot, rule of more than one. You always want to have more than one server in your pool, and more than one Cribl stream server, or any server in your pool, in your load balancer pool. Never start with one. If you're doing syslog, for example, don't ever point your devices at your Cribl stream server. Always use your load balancers. Those are the kind of things that you have, those repeatable patterns that are scalable. So for example, if you don't use a load balancer and you point all your firewalls right at a server, that server goes down for maintenance or from a failure, you're now down. You have no HA, you have no resiliency. even simple things like patching, you're losing data. And also then scalability. So say you have too much data and you can't scale the server anymore, what you going to do? And so this is what I mean about minimizing rework. Use your load balancers, use your tools, and try to enforce that if possible throughout your entire deployment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, resiliency is a big topic in cyber as well as in data, right? I mean, just thinking about your business processes and what happens if you're hacked or you're hit with ransomware that shuts down part of your business.
Yeah.
So companies across the board are getting very comfortable with this distributed, multiple capabilities that could fall back and be available, and then also, you know, that model will show you where your weak link is, right? So if everything is going through a single load balancer, then that's where you need to be extra careful in terms of when you do releases to that, or when you do changes in that space, or the detection and security around that. Um, and so, as much as possible, redundancy is I mean, so important. If you fly on an airplane, there's two or three of everything and can function with two of those three non-functional, to be so safe. It's just a critical part of a critical system.
Yeah, we're running short of time. I want to share a quick story. I was working with a customer, and this is something that's happened to me, where the capacity team went and turned off a bunch of the CPU from their syslog servers because they said you're only been using 25% of your CPU in this quarter, and so you don't need all this other CPU. And he said, of course, 12 hours after they moved a quarter of the CPU, his utilization went up by 10x, and it all crashed. And this is an example of why having that business requirement of resiliency, that the business is saying that we have to be able to sustain 5 or 10x load in order to support these critical functions, that gives you something to give to the capacity team to tell them that they need to cool it. And so, but that's why that's so important to have these requirements, because just, it's a critical system. It can't be treated as just, a business system that just can only use, your average CPU.
And if I could make it just a quick kind of shameless plug here, I mean, one of the
Sure.
reasons why consultants get engaged, even on the most simple tool install, is a lot of times this is a coordination problem across lots of different teams, lots of different places, and it's nobody's job, day to day to make that happen. So the nice thing is you can get some consultants together that go knock on doors, collect those requirements, produce a document that you can refer to in the future, and help nail down those additional requirements that are necessary to deliver the value. So that's a lot of the time where we spend a lot of our effort enabling clients with Cribl and other tools. It's just making sure that ecosystem and that information is gathered.
I recommend it, especially if you're new to the space, if you're new into engineering and architecture. Um, Services from teams like Randy's, it's just critical to help you learn how to understand these things, get ahead of it. Because a lot of times you're just simply overwhelmed with your day to day, and adding in a new tool and doing your day to day job can get real challenging. And that's where the services from organizations like Optiv are so critical. So, a couple of closing thoughts. I'm going to say it till my tongue falls out. Start with your business objectives. Make sure you align everything to support those business objectives. Build a repeatable strategy. Start small and build over time. Randy, you got any wisdom to share to the crowd?
Communicate early, communicate often, communicate across different channels. You're the expert, but the onus is on you to make sure that the leaders and the other stakeholders and consumers of your tool are informed about what you're doing. They're not going to pick up a book and figure it out for themselves. So meet them where they're at and just over communicate all the stuff that we've been talking about.
That's great advice. I want to thank you. I'm hoping that we're able to help architects and engineers out there, get it together, help give some guidance, because this is not easy. I'm not kidding when I say you buy the tool, now the hard part starts. And so I'm just hoping that we help give some advice, help everyone avoid the mistakes I've made over and over again. Thank you. Hope you have a good day. We'll have you back really soon.
Awesome. Thanks a lot.
Hey, take care. Thank you.